I'm really proud to introduce to all the people from Piratorama somebody who's some kind of godfather of the pirate movement, Rick, who founded the Pirate Party in Sweden. How long is it now ago?
That was January 1st, 2006. So seeing what we've become in 6.5 years, is just amazing. I mean, we now exist in over 50 countries. Germany has leapfrogged Sweden, which was supposed to be the starter motor for the movement, but you guys didn't even wait for us to give you resources once we were in parliament. You just went ahead and started winning elections. Hey.
There was recently a big international meeting in Prague. You were meeting there some other people from all the other pirate parties all around Europe. What is your feeling? Will be there soon like a whole European-wide professional pirate movement in parties?
Professional is... Well, I think we're going to get resources to work full-time on this, if that's what I mean by professional. But we're not going to get the polished look or perhaps polished attitude that other politicians have. We are not career politicians, we're activists. The reason I look like this is because I need to look electable, for lack of a better word. It's like they say, if you're going to offend people with substance, don't also offend them with the way you look, right? Yeah. So the more radical you are, the more conservative you need to look.
This is actually true. But what's for us quite fantastic to think about, I mean, when you started, I'm sure you had not this big vision what it will become. How did you came up to start a party at that moment?
Actually, I had. I mean, I done the math and realized that there would be enough voters to change Sweden. I mean, politics is a numbers game, right? It's a spectator sport, and at the end of the day, it's the quantity of votes that matter. It's about how many people understand what you're saying. It's not about how deep you can think. It's about your ability to explain them. And I realized that at that point, the quantity would come from the file shares in Sweden who are demonized by the then politicians. There were 1.2 million file shares in Sweden. If just 1/5 were fed up enough, then the Pirate Party would be in parliament. So I figured that if we can do this in Sweden, flipping Sweden to net friendliness would start swinging the pendulum back. So the plan was to change Sweden, Europe, and the world in that order. Once we'd entered parliament in Sweden, now we're in the European Parliament, so we're not all bad. Once we'd entered parliament in Sweden, we would help other key countries in Europe do the same thing. And with perhaps Germany, France, maybe Poland, 3 to 4 key countries, we would be able to flip Europe. Once we'd flipped Europe, which is the largest economy on the planet after all, if Europe says it does not respect monopolies that supersede civil liberties, then the rest of the world has no choice but to follow. We were going to change Sweden, Europe, and the world in that order. Only now, Germany is just steaming ahead, and Germany has a kingmaker position. It has a tie-breaking position in European policy on this matter. Currently, it's before the entry of the Piratenpartei, it's UK, France, and Germany who is pushing for crackdown on the net against the will of most of Eastern Europe, like with Poland in the spearhead. So if you guys succeed, which you're already doing, by the way, and tip the scales of Germany, it's going to tip the scales of European policy. If you tip the scales of European policy, you're going to flip Europe. If you flip Europe, you're going to flip the world. So the plan that I thought would take 30 years is almost winning after 6.
This is a really beautiful vision, and I think we will go ahead with this. For us, it's also interesting. What's the current situation in Sweden, and do you have some kind of feeling that there comes a feedback with this tremendous success in Germany to Sweden? And how does in Sweden media react on the success in Germany of the Pirate Party?
Oh, there's lots and lots of Swedish media about the Piratenpartei right now. Just today, in one of the very largest papers, if not the largest, there was an article saying that the German pirates are steaming ahead of the Swedish mothership, which is kind of a very beautiful illustration in words, if you like. And what we learned in the 2010 general elections, when we failed to convert votes in the European elections to the general elections in Parliament, was that who was the party leader, was walking in the streets. I was asking people, hey, I'm from the Pirate Party. Have you heard of us? Yes, of course, people would say. So do you want to see us in Parliament? And people say, yes, of course, you guys are so needed in the Swedish Parliament. Oh, so you're going to vote for us then? No, I can't do that. And I'm like, why not? You just said you want to see us in Parliament. Yeah, but you don't have a full platform. I can't vote for a party that can't answer all the political questions. And when you heard that story from a couple of hundred people, you realize that people really like us, but there is a psychological barrier to actually putting your vote in the ballot box. And if there's that block, you're not going to get in Parliament. That's when we were busy doing the election campaign in 2010. That's when you guys here in the Piratenpartij had the exact same debate and decided to start broadening your program. So I think that's what we're currently learning. For the next round of elections in Sweden, 2014, we're now going through all of that process and broadening our program considerably, working from principles and seeing how they reflect on all aspects of society. So we are repeating the bid in 2014, learning from your success, and that's why I really love about this movement, that we're behaving like one coherent movement with national chapters, and we're looking at each other and see they were successful, they were successful, they were successful. So we observe, we copy, we remix, we reuse all the time. So we are living our policies.
Beautiful vision. I'm personally quite interested because half of my family comes from Finland. There's this Piraattipuolue, and how do you see actually the other Scandinavian countries? It's not so strong, the movement, for example, in Finland or Norway that it had been in Sweden. And why do you think is it like this?
The Finnish Piraattipuolue is very strong in terms of its passion with the activists. They're seriously passionate. Yeah, so they're a bit weak in numbers still, but they are seriously passionate. So if they get the right catalyst, they can detonate overnight into the critical mass needed to make a parliamentary bid. Norway has not taken off. I'm not sure why, really. I mean, they have repressive politicians just like everybody else. They've been discussing it for a time, but it hasn't really catalyzed into a movement. Denmark has it tough because their rules of registering new parties. The system is seriously rigged against getting a new political party approved. It's like you need to collect a number of tens of thousands of signatures, send them to the tax authority, who are sending them out to these people again, who then need to resend them back to the tax authority to verify that they're actually... Yeah, and to do this, I mean, even collecting tens of thousands of signatures on the street is an effort. Doing that is designed to be impossible.
Let's get into another European movement at the moment, which is quite fascinating to see how much Europeans have now in common a fight against like trade agreements like ACTA, for example. How do you think it started that all over Europe there came these demonstrations against ACTA, and how did it came so far that it looks now ACTA has failed?
Well, you need to go back to the 70s to see where this is coming from, and this is going to be part of a sort of a lecture, but it ends up very interesting. In the 1970s, as Toyotas hit the American streets, the politicians in the United States were panicking because they realized that if Americans prefer Japanese cars over American, then America's value, or the United States' value as an industry nation, is doomed. So a lot of committees were appointed to answer one specific question. How will the United States maintain its global economic dominance in an era where it doesn't produce anything of value or anything of competitive value? The answer came from an unexpected direction. It came from a committee named the ACTN, the Advisory Committee on Trade Negotiations, spearheaded by the then CEO of Pfizer, Edmund Pratt, who suggests that the United States could link foreign policy and trade negotiations, essentially bullying other countries into signing lopsided so-called free trade agreements that in effect gave the United States a free ride. They would get to rent out drawings, get finished products in return, and pretend it's a fair deal. And ACTA, so this deal... They went with this to the UN WIPO, who threw them out on the street, saying that this is lopsided. We are actually into fair trading and not this kind of lopsided agreement. So they hijacked another body, which was the then GATT, and turned it into a new body, the WTO, signing the TRIPS agreement. So this is why ACTA, this is how I'm wrapping this up. This ACTA is being marketed as TRIPS Plus. It's the next step. It's building on and locking down additions to the TRIPS agreement. And doing so, we've seen what the TRIPS agreement has done. I mean, people in the third world are forbidden from making medicines using their own knowledge, their own raw materials, in their own factories for their own dying people who die from horrible but perfectly curable third world conditions. And I think that's bordering on a crime against humanity. So what we're seeing with ACTA is that the net has enabled mass-scale protests against this kind of selling our democracy to the highest corporate bidder. And I think that's a beautiful thing to behold. And I think, to be honest, these people who are trying to buy our democracy still thinks that there's another corporate player behind the scenes who are pulling the strings. They really don't understand that they are up against 250 million individual citizens.
Don't you think it's actually quite sad and brutal to see when people talk in media about ACTA that basically everybody just talks about copyrights and not so much about these aspects like with generica, medications and that kind of things. Basically Amnesty International, Médecins Sans Frontières and all these other organizations were already telling how terrible ACTA is on this field. But in our parliaments, everybody's just only talking about 70 years of copyright. That's it.
I think that's very sad, to be honest, and that's one of my personal passions, as in getting pharmaceuticals to the third world. Today, they're locked down by monopolies that are designed not to make more pharmaceuticals as they're marketed, but to guarantee profits to pharmaceutical companies. It was, after all, these companies that fought for the monopolies in the first place. I'm a regular donor to Médecins Sans Frontières, and I think this is one of the things they do well to lift this issue. Unfortunately and sadly, as party leader in Sweden, I fought for this with the passion I burn inside, but it just didn't draw votes. Like you say, it doesn't gain traction, and I'm personally very sad about that because this is something I think is terribly unjust in the world.
So do you think there's actually a way that Europe could basically sneak out of some trade agreement like TRIPS? For example, when they talk about copyrights and we talk about we want to shorten it down, and then they always say it's not possible, these 70 years comes from TRIPS, what was basically initiated by Walt Disney's corporation, who wanted to have these longer times. When we would cut down TRIPS, we would still have the Berner Übereinkunft, which is about 50 years of copyright. Do we think we have somehow, on a European legislative perspective, a way to change and to get out of these kind of trade agreements?
Of course. I mean, these agreements are not binding law. Everybody needs to remember that. Binding law is made in our parliaments, and our parliaments do not have guns to their heads. They can vote for whatever law they like. If we violate an international trade agreement, which it isn't even certain that we do, but if we do, then at the end of the day, we might be sentenced to a fine. Somebody else might have a trade embargo against us. And you can't have a trade embargo against the European Union because it's the largest economy on the planet. It doesn't work. Just like Cuba can't have a trade embargo against the United States, nobody can have a trade embargo against the European Union. So we have this agreement which is just one of goodwill. There are no effective sanctions. If we think that this agreement is counterproductive, we can start by protesting it. If other countries don't agree, then we can unilaterally declare that this is not anymore in our best interest. But that said, there are plenty of things within the TRIPS agreement that we can use to our advantage. If we mention the word compulsory licensing, for example, the monopoly maximalists are starting to shiver in their shoes and want to talk about something else.
Another thing what is for us quite important at the moment of the whole copyright discussion is this paradigm shift, how media competence raised with the internet, how people start to transformational use other things which are on the internet. Do you think it's basically this change of paradigm what means also that we have to free from these typical ways how music and all cultural goods are marketed today?
I think you're on to a key here. The one thing that has changed in the world is that everybody has received a voice. There is no longer somebody who, using money, using existing resources, can declare themselves a spokesperson for other people, with them not wanting to do so, without their consent. And this goes through all parts of society. It is no longer possible for a politician to lie to us and say that these groups want that, or are evil, or are good, when we can talk to the concerned people directly. And this makes those politicians very confused, and they want to turn the clock back. So this is reflected not just in the cultural arena, where these previous gatekeepers, as it's important to distinguish the artists from these monopoly holders that have been owning not just the distribution chain, but even our cultural heritage. And it's not in our interest to let them do that. So the paradigm shift is that everybody has received a voice, and the previous gatekeepers are waking up to the fact that they're no longer needed and are using every trick in the book to try to turn back the clock. They're not going to succeed with that, but they're not going down without a very, very serious fight.
Coming back to Germany, we started now entering parliaments in different counties in Germany. We started in Berlin, now came Saarland. We are looking into North Rhine-Westphalia and Schleswig-Holstein. So what is your expectation? What happens next in Germany? Do you think when we enter now all these county parliaments that we have a really good chance to change this system?
Absolutely. I mean, you are already changing the system. Just the other day, the deadline for re-implementing the data retention directive ran out for Germany, and the administration in Germany did not come to an agreement because the parties in the administration, in the ruling coalition, just refused to give more votes to the Power Party. Merely by existing, you are protecting civil liberties, and that's very important. So, yeah, I expect that, like the polls say, you're going to get into these two regional parliaments. And on entering the Bundestag, I think you have a very, very strong chance of tipping the scales of Germany. If you're tipping the scales of Germany, you're tipping the scales of Europe. If you tip the scales of Europe, we've changed the world.
This is true. So you also hope that the next step is like then countries like South America, like Russia. Do you think there is a real chance for this?
The United States is kind of tricky because it's trapped in this monopoly regime. It depends on having monopolies. It depends on having lopsided trade agreements to fuel its economy. It depends on having the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency. Without it, it's broke. It's structurally broke and bankrupt, has been since the 1970s, essentially, with the Vietnam War, specifically since August 15, 1971. But South America has only half the economic strength of Europe. So if this would have started in South America, it would not have been able to stand up against the economic powers of the world who wanted these monopolies. That's why it's so crucial to start this in the European Union, which is the world's largest economy, which is free to ignore these monopoly agreements, because unlike valuable goods and services, monopolies only have value when everybody agrees to them. If somebody large enough say that this is no longer in our interest, the structure will collapse.
We were talking about paradigm shift. So we started now as Pirate Party here in Germany to think about the unconditional basic income. Is that also one of these important steps for the future of mankind to change all these kind of problems of poverty?
This is a very interesting topic, although it's completely separate. We are observing that we are moving past the industrial age in so many ways. And one of these is looking at the youth unemployment today. It's just rampant. We are seeing so many parallels with the Industrial Revolution, as farmers were no longer needed in the quantity they had before. So people who were no longer needed in farming sought their luck elsewhere. They moved into the cities and that they got jobs in industry, and so the industry took off. We're now seeing the same thing, that people are simply no longer needed in the industry. Every time I hear somebody asks, how will the artists get paid, I think they're extremely cynical, when the really interesting question is, how will the youth, our entire growing up generation, get paid by an industry that doesn't need them anymore? So observing how much of our society depends on volunteer work already. I mean, just look at the net. I think that it's time to start valuing all of this volunteer work that, after all, is powering a lot of how our society works. I know that in terms of unconditional basic income, which I think would solve a lot of our educational problems about our policy, to be honest, I know a lot of people say that if you got money for free, then nobody's going to work for the rest of their lives, and that's simply not true. Look at Wikipedia, which is the world's biggest encyclopedia, built by volunteers in their spare time. Look at GNU Linux, which is the world's most used server operating system, which is built by volunteers in their spare time. We humans create, we produce, not always because we're paid for it, but because of who we are. We are building a better world together. And it's true that some people will choose not to be part of this, but these very few people will choose not to work whether they are employed or not, frankly. These are the people you'd find in unemployment who try to slack off and not do work anyway. If they had an unconditional basic income, yeah, they'll slack off, but that's no different from today. And that's a very, very small part of the population.
Thank you very much, Rick. This was beautiful to talk also about commons at the end. And ich habe mich sehr gefreut, dass der Rick hier zu Besuch war. This is our godfather here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and all the best for our together future in the Pirate Party.
All the best for our movement. We're changing the world and we're doing it together. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.